Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, we're going to talk about the Mets payroll. There's been a lot of talk about that, and we've got some thoughts on that. We're going to talk about Justin Turner and the leadership void that he maybe leaves with the Dodgers. And we're going to talk about our favorite JT moments, and we may have little thoughts about a police chase that's going on as we're recording. So, the true LA experience, that's what's on tap. So, let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Dodger fans. This is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Or even better, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're watching and listening right now, and then you will never miss a day because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time with us, my name is Jeff Snider. That guy next to me is Vince Samperio. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans, just like you are. We've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room. So we're not quite insiders, but we bring you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. And after maybe our most unusual and weird episode ever yesterday, we are back together, Vince. For those of you who missed yesterday's episode, which isn't many of you, judging by the numbers, a lot of you saw it and or listened to it. We did a split episode, as we often do when our schedules don't quite match up. And usually when we do our split episodes, I record first. Just because I'm an hour later time zone wise. And so I ended up recording first and Vince goes after me. And that's what we did this time. I finished recording. I texted Vince, let him know that I was done recording. And he confirmed that he got my message. And then about 10 minutes later, he texted me a link to John Heyman's tweet saying that Carlos Correa had signed with the Mets. And I did my whole segment about what if the Dodgers swoop in and grab Carlos Correa from the Giants. And then by the time my head hit my pillow, my portion of the podcast was outdated, and so yeah, it ended up being weird. So by the time people listened to me talking, everything I was saying was outdated. Although it's still, I think I had enough opinions in there that I still hold that it was worth keeping in there. But yeah, it was kind of weird, Vince.
Yeah, I mean, it was 11:40, around 11:40 p.m. Pacific time when John Heyman's tweet came out. And, obviously for work, I was on it right away, but no one else took a while for some confirmations to come in. And all the confirmations came in from a couple of Dodger beat writers, a couple LA based beat writers, and one Bay Area based beat writer. They're probably the only ones awake. So it was an interesting time. It's one of those where, you're hoping you get the interaction in terms of like my job. And then you're kind of waiting to see what when people wake up and see it. Ended up staying up, later, so I had to catch up on sleep during the day. But it all worked out. It was fun, and to see Giants fans that I have on my timeline from when I used to work in the Bay Area, and some I still work with now. That was, kind of fun to see them, and now all the stories are coming out, and it's kind of reflecting a little bit on Giants leadership as a whole. So it looks like if the Giants can become an organizational failure and mess, I'm not going to be upset about it.
Yeah, it does seem like maybe it was a little bit of buyer's remorse on the part of the Giants. And, in the couple of weeks between when they agreed to the deal and now they start thinking, holy crap, 13 years, really? And kind of like when you put in an offer on a house you can't afford, and then the seller accepts your offer, and you're like, crap, I hope something comes up at the inspection so I can back out of this thing and not lose my earnest money. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this affects the Giants going forward, especially working with Scott Boras, but even with other agents too. I mean, if the Giants get a reputation from this as a team that's willing to back out of a deal just because they had buyer's remorse, that's going to be a bad deal for them. I'm glad Correa is not going to the Giants. I don't have, I mean, really my only, I have friends who are Giants fans, but my uncle Jim is the only one I actually talk to on a regular basis who's a Giants fan, and he wasn't thrilled with the 13 years to start with. So he's actually happy and relieved about this. And so I don't have any sort of petty feelings about it. I am glad that Carlos Correa is not in the National League West. I mean, that's mostly my feeling about it, because Carlos Correa is really good at baseball, and the Dodgers only facing him 7 times instead of 14 is good news for me.
Yeah, like I said on yesterday's episode, it's good in that sense, but it's kind of like when Trey Turner got traded from the Padres to the Nationals, and you're like, and the Dodgers faced Trey Turner in the 2016 NODS, and you're like, man, I'm glad the Dodgers don't have to face this guy 19 times, but then you realize, well, we are facing him in the playoffs, which is probably a bigger deal than it is. Kind of how it is with Correa, except with the Mets, which we're going to get into right now, and that payroll and everything else that's going with it, and the way they're running things. I'm not as confident that they'll be good for multiple years, but at least for the next couple years, they'll probably be good. And they might have to face Carlos Correa in the playoffs, but they'll get to that bridge when they'll cross that bridge when they get there.
Yeah, when you factor in the penalties for luxury tax that the Mets are going to pay, their payroll is almost twice as high as the second highest team right now. It's ridiculous. It's crazy and ridiculous. I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of people talking about how it's unfair or it's ruining baseball, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't necessarily, you know, I agree for the most part with people who say, well, other teams should spend more. And I don't think it's realistic to expect every owner to spend the way Steve Cohen is spending. But you and I were talking before we hit record, Vince. A team like the Pirates, like, yeah, it's a bummer that the Mets are spending 5 times as much as the Pirates, but the Pirates aren't spending as much as they could. And so it's like, at least spend 160 million bucks like you can afford to before you complain about the Mets spending 490 million or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's one of those where you're complaining about a guy you were never in on. If you're complaining that they got Carlos Correa or whatever or the payroll, it's like you were never in on any of these guys, so you can't be upset about it. And I've seen, especially with my day job, I've seen a lot more like general baseball fans when things like this happen. Every time the Dodgers are linked to a player of the Yankees and now the Mets, it's like, oh, this is ruining baseball and everything else and blah blah blah. And it's like, other than the fact that if let's just say you're a Pirates fan, Guardians, whoever. I mean, the Guardians did extend Jose Ramirez, but a team like that usually doesn't spend. Yeah, you're probably never going to have a chance to sign a big name free agent, but it doesn't mean you're not going to have a chance to win and, be a playoff team and even win a World Series, because the Dodgers have had the highest payroll the last few years and, they have won World Series out of it. Yankees have had one of the highest payrolls for the last, however long years. They haven't won since 2009. The Mets are just putting all this money into their payroll after, not spending as much before. And, they didn't even make it out of the wild card round last year. And it's, the league with no salary cap and people complaining. Yeah, you have some of the same teams in the playoffs every year, but for the most part, it's one of the most, has the most parity for a league in terms of World Series champions. There hasn't been a repeat champion in forever. And other than the Giants winning those 3 and 5, there hasn't really been a team that consistently wins multiple championships. And for the most part, most teams make the playoffs at the very least. Even the Pirates have made the playoffs since the Dodgers started their 10-year run of winning the NL West. So it has parity. Like it sucks that you're never going to get a big guy like that, but it also is a matter of, well, your team's not spending either, so it's hard to go about it. So, yeah, can there be difference? Yeah, can it be different? Yeah, but with the salary cap comes a salary floor, and those poor teams don't want a salary floor, so they can't complain that there's no salary cap, and that's the way it is. They just signed the new CBA, nothing's going to change, and for the most part, for me, like I said on yesterday's episode, I'm glad the Mets have all the pressure of the big money team now and everything else, and not that it affected Dodgers players or anything, but I'm glad it's not on the Dodgers right now, just because it's fun to see it on someone else's foot.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to come back in a minute. We're going to talk a little bit more about some parallels to those Yankees teams, and then we're going to dig into Justin Turner and the leadership void that he is leaving on the Dodgers. So thanks for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. This episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football to college bowl season to basketball and soccer, we've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we are back. We want to thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. As we're recording this, it's currently 10:42 p.m. LA time, and I'm recording on this monitor and then on this monitor over here, where I'm usually peeking at Twitter. I like my setup because when I look at Twitter, it looks like I'm just looking at Vince like this. But today, instead of looking at Twitter, I have my other eye on a police chase, which is a weird one. It's an LA tradition, though, and it's something. Ever since I discovered that you can follow an account on Twitter that will alert you and give you links every time there's a police chase being televised, my kids feel more like Southern Californians. My kids were born and raised in Utah so far. My wife is from Utah, and so I'm the only Californian living in my house. But I've gotten my kids. They recognize the sound. When you turn on a police chase and you just hear the whirring of the helicopter, and it's just that high pitched wheezing sound. They'll hear that and then, oh, is there a police chase? And they run over to watch. So this one's weird. This guy, it's not a high-speed chase. He's been mostly stop till stop and then go again for 20 feet and then stop again. Actually got out of his car for a minute and yelled at the police, which seems like a good way to get yourself hurt. But so far, it's kind of interesting. But I'll let you know if it ends by the time we're done recording. One last thought I had on the Mets situation before we move on to Justin Turner. There's a lot of parallels between this Mets situation and the Yankees of the mid 2000s. And you mentioned the Yankees have been near the top of payroll every year for as long as we can remember, and yet they've only won one World Series in the last 21 years, and that was in 2009. In 2004, before the 2004 season, the Yankees brought in Alex Rodriguez, who was the best shortstop in baseball. And they moved him to third base because they already had Derek Jeter. Obviously, if they had really known what they were doing, they would have moved Derek Jeter to third base because A-Rod was the superior defensive and offensive shortstop. But, whatever, they did what they did. The Mets now brought in Carlos Correa, even though they already have Francisco Lindor. They're moving Correa to third. So a rich New York team bringing in a shortstop, moving him to third base because they already have a superstar at short. And it's worth noting that it wasn't until A-Rod's sixth season with the Yankees that the Yankees actually won a World Series with him. And it was the only one they won in the 10 years or so that they had A-Rod. So it's like you said, this doesn't guarantee a title. The Dodgers have been the highest spending team at times and not won the World Series. It's, obviously having good players helps a lot, and spending more money makes it easier to have good players. But there's something to be said for spending money wisely. And my underarching or under whatever thought on all this, I know Steve Cohen can afford to spend like this indefinitely, but I wonder if he will, because you don't get to be as rich as Steve Cohen is by making dumb financial decisions. And maybe he'll just throw out all his financial wisdom that got him to be filthy rich, throw it out the window, and just go with the emotion as far as owning the Mets and just continue to throw money at it over and over. But, hypothetically, if the Mets don't win the World Series in the next 3 years, will Cohen continue to run these, close to $500 million payrolls? He's committed to several guys for a long time, but we know Lindor and Correa are going to get paid for a long time, but Justin Verlander, it's only a couple of years. Scherzer's only a couple of years left. And some of the younger guys, like, will they continue to keep spending like this if it doesn't pay off in a World Series? Or will this be something that Cohen almost gets bored with, of like when he realizes, if he realizes, there's a chance that the Mets do win the next 4 World Series, and it people just decide that that's the way to do it. But if they don't win any, will that sour Steve Cohen on owning a baseball team at all?
Yeah, it's possible. He's mentioned before as the Dodgers kind of like the blueprint, and he's doing what the Guggenheim partnership did when they came in, just to a way greater extent of influxing, paying for talent right now, hoping that by the time some of that talent is gone or starts hitting, prime or whatever the case is, that the younger guys will come in and kind of supplement it, and then you can have the machine. Whereas which the Dodgers are this year is going to be a proving ground for that for them, because they seem to be trying to hand over the keys to a lot of younger guys. So yeah, I don't think he'll try to. I would think he wouldn't try to spend 400, 500 mil every year, but you never know it with guys like this that have that much money that maybe get consumed by winning and stuff like that. He could, until he realizes maybe I don't know. I don't think it'll keep up, and hopefully for the sake of just like being funny, they don't win the World Series, and then it all ends up blowing up, and they end up being the Mets. The Mets are going to Met, but we'll have to see and wait.
Yep, absolutely. All right, enough Mets talk. Let's talk about a former Met, Justin Turner. He's a former Met. He's also now, unfortunately, a former Dodger. And I talked about it the other day in my solo episode, but this is our first time together since Justin Turner left the Dodgers. And the leadership void, I think Justin Turner's on field performance can be reasonably replaced. I think JD Martinez, JT was mostly a DH anyway, and most of his at bats are going to come at DH. And I think JD Martinez, who's now going to get almost all the at bats at DH, is likely to have a better offensive season than JT next year. Like on the field, I don't think it's that big a deal. But the leadership void, David Vassay was on the radio yesterday or today, and he was talking about how Dave Roberts is going to miss Justin Turner because of that leadership in the clubhouse from a player. And I get that, and I agree. I think Justin Turner I think he has great leadership skills. He's shown that he's going to be missed. But I also think the Dodgers, I don't think leadership skills are irreplaceable. And they have, Mookie Betts the last couple of years has taken on a bigger leadership role. Freddie Freeman, people raved about him from the get-go about his work ethic and everything. I think he showed leadership skills. Clayton Kershaw obviously has been around the longest, and he isn't a vocal leader, but he is, I think we've heard enough from enough people about watching Kershaw go about his work and everything that appeals to them in a leadership capacity. And even JD Martinez, he is well known as a good leader. It may take him a little time to just as the new guy, and he's not quite superstar level like Mookie and Freddie were. They were able to come in and immediately be leaders. It may take JD Martinez a little bit longer, but it seems like they have enough of what they need leadership wise to get the job done. Don't you think?
Yeah, and it's not to, kind of put down Turner and the leadership that he did bring and everything else, but you can look at it like some other fans may look at it, and all that leadership, if you want to look at it clear, black and white, only brought one World Series. So, you can look at it like that. You can look at it at the fact of, maybe they needed a new voice. A lot of people wanted to replace Dave Roberts. Maybe this is the replacement they need. There's an article written about Freddie and Mookie, and Mookie's kind of stepped into more of that leadership role since coming here, not just on the field, but off the field and in other aspects of life. And Freddie Freeman was that guy. JD Martinez, was tasked with helping Mookie when he signed with the Red Sox, and he ended up, whether how much influence he had, Mookie Betts did win MVP when JD Martinez was tasked with helping him out. So, that part's there. I'm sure he'll be well respected right away, especially if he has Mookie's respect and everything else. And I guess the part of what Vassay said, and I don't know if he said it right now, but he said it before we talked of JT helping everyone kind of buy into what Doc is doing. I guess that would be where it would really be an influence, because if he's not there, talking to younger guys or talking to guys that come in and maybe aren't getting the playing time they want, or they're in a platoon role, whatever the case is. If that was something he did, and that was something that helped the team all these years when there was really no issues for guys with playing time, that at least not in out in the public, then yeah, that would probably hurt. Although with the influx of younger guys and people knowing what the Dodgers are now, maybe they're beyond that point, but maybe not. So if that was the case, then yeah. But in general, just like the leadership, I not like I said, not to dismiss Justin Turner, but I don't think they're going to be lacking for leaders. unless he did these specific things mentioned that would be different. And it is harder for a guy like Mookie or Freddie to maybe fill that role because they are superstar players and they've never really had to, necessarily fight. Once they got to the peaks, they've been at the peak since then.
Yeah, for sure. And Vassay has spent more time in the locker room than we have. He theoretically knows more than we do. This did feel a little bit to me like it was him kind of making something up, like I don't know that he would be privy to what does Justin Turner say to Chris Taylor about playing time. I just don't know that Dave Vassay would know that. The fact is players move on. And even I thought back to 2016 when AJ Ellis got traded. And I know you have feelings about AJ Ellis, but at the time there was a lot of outcry about AJ Ellis as a team leader, as Kershaw's best friend, and how it was going to affect the Dodgers negatively. Well, the Dodgers went to the NLCS that year, and then they went to the World Series 3 of the next 4 years after that. And so, they survived AJ Ellis going away. Obviously, JT, I think, is more universally beloved than Ellis was, especially if you believe some behind the scenes things. But it's kind of the same thing. And you look at Matt Kemp left twice. Yasiel Puig left, Kike and Jock and Greinke, and ever since free agency started, players leave teams, and hopefully the things that people learned from JT are still there, and they'll be. I think the players actually handle it better than the fans do because the players understand it's a business, and I mean, JT actually did grow up rooting for the Dodgers and was living out his dream. Clayton Kershaw grew up a Rangers fan. He's loyal to the Dodgers right now, but he also understands that it's a business, and Kershaw's been with the same organization his whole career. Mookie Betts gets it even more. Freddie Freeman gets it even more, that sometimes you move on, and that's just how it is. So it is a bummer. And like you said, we're not disparaging JT at all because the leadership was absolutely there. I just think that they will survive without it because they can get it somewhere else. So, we're going to talk about JT a little bit more in our last segment, coming back in a minute, because we are going to talk about some of our favorite JT moments in a Dodger uniform. So that's what we're going to do next. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. This episode is brought to you by the NHTSA. Did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even in states where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. And if you think law enforcement officers can't tell when you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell when you're high. Your coworkers can tell. Even your parents can tell. Everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is, if you feel different, you drive different. And driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI. Paid for by the NHTSA. All right, we are back. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. When you're done with this, for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. It's the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's Take of the Day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. All right, Vince, in our last few minutes here, we want to talk about Justin Turner some more. It's been 4 days now since we found out he was leaving the Dodgers. But as we said, this is our first time talking to each other since then. And it's, so many wonderful moments. Like, I don't know of any Dodger fan who doesn't like Justin Turner. And even people outside the Dodgers organization, outside Dodger fans, he's pretty universally beloved. If anybody dislikes him, it's usually because of the 2020 World Series when he came back on the field after testing positive for COVID. Maybe a lapse in judgment there that ultimately didn't hurt anything, but could have. And so some people, I'm actually, this is Thursday's episode. I believe I'm a guest on Locked On MLB today. And Sully and I talked about Justin Turner, and Sully in the first sentence talking about Justin Turner, he mentioned the 2020 World Series thing. So maybe people outside Dodger fans think of that more than we do. But as Dodger fans, we think of the wonderful moments. And so I thought we'd just talk about a couple of our favorite, not really a draft style, just talk about some of our favorite moments from JT. Vince.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of the ones on social media the last few days. The walk-off home run off Lackey is obviously going to be there. But the one, I mean, that ended up being a bobblehead and was commemorated was the double play in 2020 against the Braves. He gets the ball, throws it home, gets the first out, ball gets back to him, and he ends up getting full extension and getting that out. And that was a string of, well, first of all, it's a play that I've seen a million times just because I've watched the 2020 highlights from that series and from the World Series so many times. But it's one that I think it's not overlooked, but you just forget about it sometimes. Like, oh yeah, that was such a big moment, and the Dodgers needed a lot of those moments to happen in order for everything to happen in 2020. So start off there because that one was just fun, and it was not necessarily all him. It was bad base running, but hey, you got to take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was such a huge moment because of the swing and momentum, because the Braves had two runners on and nobody out, I believe. Second and third and nobody out. And so, and Ronald Acuna was three batters away. And so it was like, oh crap. And the Dodgers, I think it was 2-1 at the time. Dodgers were up by a run. Anyway, so it was like, okay, best case scenario here is Acuna comes up in a tie game with the go ahead run on third base. Like you look at all the different things that could happen. It's like, crap, this game could really get out of hand right now. And then that play happened. Instead, Acuna ended up leading off the next inning. Acuna didn't even get to bat that inning because of this double play. It was such a swing in momentum. And the biggest swing, I've said this before on this show, the biggest swing I've ever had from one moment to the next of how I felt about the Dodgers' chances of winning a game, especially an important game. You mentioned the Lackey home run and everything about that, including it being off John Lackey. Like John Lackey has one of the most punchable faces in baseball. I'm sure his mom loves him, and maybe other people do too. But like, I wanted JT to win that game, especially because John Lackey was on the mound. And so many wonderful things about that home run because they didn't need a home run. It was extra innings. And so as soon as JT hit the ball, you knew that he won the game because worst case scenario, he's getting a sac fly here and the game's over. But then it cleared the wall. And so it was, being on the anniversary of Kirk Gibson's walk-off homer and my buddy Keith catching ball on the fly and all that stuff. It was just a beautiful moment. Like I think about, I don't know if you remember, do you remember where I was watching that moment from, Vince? Have I told you?
In the bathroom?
I was in the bathroom. I have a TV in my bathroom, and I wasn't going to the bathroom anymore, but the Dodgers were rallying, and so I couldn't move. And so, you do what you have to do for the team. And for me, what I had to do for the team was stay in the bathroom to watch that. And yeah, it was a beautiful moment. I wasn't there. I didn't go to any of the games in that series because it was my kid's fall break and we were leaving the next day on vacation. But that was a huge one for me that I'll never forget. I know.
Yeah, and I was at a Buffalo Wild Wings somewhere in the Bay Area because the Raiders played that day. And once the Raider game was over, we hurried up and got over to find a place to watch the game. And yeah, I mean that was fun. And like I said, it's probably, I don't remember right now, but probably in the moment that was the first time I was like, the Dodgers are probably going to go to the World Series because now you're up 2-0. You knew they were a better team than the Cubs already, and you just felt like everything was going the right way. And that was, probably in that moment, I would imagine I felt like, okay, the Dodgers are probably going to go to the World Series. Not me being the guy that's usually not confident in the Dodgers in the postseason, but 2017 always had that different feeling. Yeah. And then moving on to 2018 and that, I mean, that home run against the Brewers that put them ahead in game 2, they were very close to going down 2-0. And then, you had the snide comments from Jeffers after and everything else that just accompanied it. But it was one of those where without that home run, I don't know if the Dodgers make the World Series again. And it's Brewers Red Sox instead of Dodgers Red Sox. So that one was a big one just because it was one of those, you weren't expecting it, and then the way he hit it was just right down the line. You were hoping it stayed fair, and to come in that situation, that whole series against the Brewers was. You go back and think about that series, there was so many little plays here and there, so many close games. Everything came down to the wire, and that there was a lot of big plays that series, but that was Justin Turner's moment in that series.
Yeah, and that one for me is very memorable again for where I was because I didn't watch that one. I listened to it. I was in the car because my daughter and I were driving down to California so that we could go to game 3 of the NLCS together. So we were in the car listening. I had just gone through the Virgin River Gorge, which is between St. George, Utah and Mesquite, Nevada. Was coming out of there and was about to stop for gas in Mesquite. I was probably 5 miles north of Mesquite, Nevada, when JT hit that. So I was going 85 miles an hour on the freeway and just clenching the steering wheel so tight. And when he hit that, I don't remember the exact call that I heard, but the emotion and, I know I was punching my steering wheel and my daughter was screaming. And it was just I realized so many of my postseason memories that don't involve the Dodgers I listen to on the radio because I do drive back and forth between Utah and California so often during the postseason that I'm often listening to the games on the radio. So like, you know, uh, what's his name? Jose Batista's big home run against the Rangers where he threw the bat. I listened to that on the radio. I think that was the same game that there was the weird inning where the catcher's throwback to the pitcher hit Shin Shu Chu and run ended up scoring on it. Anyway, I listened to all that on the radio so many games, but the Justin Turner home run was one of the rare times that I listened to a Dodger game on the radio in the postseason. And it's a different experience, but it's seared in my mind and sharing that moment with my daughter. And, I'm cheesy about sharing postseason moments with my family. I didn't have any of my family in the bathroom with me for the 2017 one, just so you know. But yeah, just so many great Justin Turner moments. And I think that's what we're going to miss. Like when we're sad about Justin Turner leaving, it's not about 2023, really. It's about 2014 through 2022. And that's what we are sad about, what we're going to miss, because Justin Turner did feel like one of those guys who should be a Dodger and felt like they should have figured out a way to keep him. I don't know if they could have. I mean, once they signed JD Martinez, it really didn't make much sense for JT to be on the team, and they clearly prioritized Martinez over Turner. And I get it from a baseball standpoint, but it's a bummer from a personal standpoint, looking back on those 9 years that he was a Dodger. And hopefully, like I said the other day, hopefully it will be just a year or two that he's out of the organization and then he'll be back in some capacity. That's what I'm hoping for. But yeah, I'm going to miss JT, Vince.
Yeah, and I mean we're out of time already, but absolute madness wouldn't have happened without Justin Turner, the great Joe Davis call. So it's another big JT moment that came through, and obviously he's had a lot of moments off the field and everything else, and working with the Dream Center and his foundation, and when he showed up when everyone was voting him into the All-Star game that one year, and he's had a lot of fun stuff with the Dodgers. But yeah, like I said, we'll miss the past, but the past still gets to be there, and realistically, he's not going to be able to hurt the Dodgers because I don't think the Red Sox will make the World Series anyway. So might be good.
Yep. My wife has 2 Dodgers jerseys. One is Zach Greinke, and she's only worn it once since Greinke left. And that was during the 2020 World Series. And we taped over the Greinke name and wrote Bueller on it. And that's it. But the JT jersey, she'll continue to wear. He's her favorite Dodger of all time. And that's, he's a guy it's easy to root for, easy to tell your kids to root for. Everything about JT is wonderful, and we will miss him. So if you're watching this, JT, and I assume you are, we love you and we'll miss you. And I think that does it for us today, right, Vince?
Yep.
We want to thank you all for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today podcast, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you're not watching and listening to Locked On Dodgers every day, we'd love if you add 1 or 2 days a month to your rotation. Please tell your friends and family who love the Dodgers as much as you do about the show. Maybe they'll like it too. You can follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at Locked On Dodgers. Vince is on Twitter at Vince Samperio. I am on Twitter at Snydog, and the DMs are open in all of those places. Our email address is lockedondodgers@gmail.com, and our phone number for voicemails or text messages is 323-863-LOCK 5625. We are here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us. When you get in your car or sit on your couch, tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Have a good one.